Thanks, Tony. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our session. Thanks for sticking it out through the whole day. My name is Allison Vox-Bierke. I'm a public health analyst within the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
And hi, everyone. My name is Mallory Polster, and I am a Prevention Science Fellow within the same office.
And we're really excited today to talk to you about some of the work that we're doing, particularly around youth sports. But before we dive into youth sports, we wanted to get a better sense of who is in the room. So we have a couple questions we're going to put in the chat, and I think, Tony, you're going to put them in the chat, just to see how familiar you are with the physical activity guidelines for Americans, which was our more broad physical activity public health policy from 2018, and how and if you are using that in your work. So I think we can rely on Tony to gather some responses from the chats before we dive in. Or do we have a bunch of quiet people?
Questions are posted for anyone who wants to answer them. Just feel free to throw them right in the chat.
Great. Well, we are gonna go ahead and dive in just to give you a background in the work that we've done from the physical activity and public health lens. Like I said, in 2008, we, the Department of Health and Human Services, released the physical activity guidelines for Americans as the first comprehensive guidance on physical activity policy from the federal government in the United States. And it was based on an extensive systematic literature review conducted by the Federal Advisory Committee called the Physical Activity Guidelines Advisory Committee. Very unique and creative. And the policy provides science-based advice on how physical activity can help promote health and also reduce the risk of chronic disease in those ages 6 and older. And then 5 years later, we released the mid-course report, which focused on how to get youth more active to meet the recommended amount of physical activity from the physical activity guidelines, which is at least 60 minutes a day for youth. And then in 2018, as I just mentioned, we released the second edition of the physical activity guidelines for Americans, which reflects an expanded evidence base, including more population groups as well as sedentary behavior and what works. So the main messages of the physical activity guidelines are broken down by population group. And there are key guidelines for all of the groups that you can see here listed on the screen. And the expanded evidence base included the preschool age children. So now the second edition is for Americans ages 3 and older. And then we additionally have some more information for individuals with chronic health conditions or disabilities, and key guidelines for safe physical activity for all age groups. So the big picture and what we've been focusing on is youth. So the youth population, which is school-aged youth 6 to 17, need at least 60 minutes a day of moderate to vigorous physical activity, and adults need at least 150 minutes of physical activity per week. You can read the key guidelines in more detail on health.gov, which is our website, and we've posted a handout in the chat, and it's also linked to both of our personal speaker profiles. So if you go to the networking tab on the feed loop and search for us, you can find that resource there as well. So over the past 2 years, our team has been focusing on school-aged youth. So we're going to share those key guidelines in more detail. And so the number hasn't changed since 2008, since the first edition. And so, as I mentioned, youth ages 6 to 17 need at least 60 minutes a day of moderate to vigorous physical activity. And also, the research shows that for health benefits, Incorporating vigorous physical activity at least 3 days a week, bone strengthening and muscle strengthening activities at least 3 days a week are crucial. And that's things like running or climbing on the playground, or a way to get all of those different types of activity and meet the key guidelines is through sports. And so Mallory is going to talk a little bit more about that.
Almost forgot to unmute. Thank you, Allison. So I think here now, I just would like to pause again, and Tony's going to throw a couple more questions into the chat there. And we just want to get a sense of if you've heard of the National Youth Sport Strategy, if you've been using it. It doesn't have to be a yes, no, since we're using the chat box. That's the benefit of not using a poll. So if you have used it and you want to share any way that you've used it, feel free to throw that into the chat box. And Tony, feel free to interrupt if you're getting some responses.
We actually did get a couple answers on the first set of questions. Didn't mean to butt in. I saw you go to another slide. We got
sure.
a few answers. Taylor Hood of Grand Canyon University says that they've not heard of the physical activity guidelines. And one Mr. Roy D. Kessel expresses that he hasn't used them enough. So we got some answers coming in. I just posted questions 3 and 4 in there. Be sure to answer them.
That's great. Well, I'm glad, even though we got that response a little delayed, that Allison reviewing them was of value, and that someone hadn't heard yet. So that's fantastic. So like Allison had mentioned, sports are a great way for youth to get the physical activity that they need. And with that, all of the great benefits that physical activity can provide. So on the left side, we've listed here some of those physical activity benefits related to bone health, heart health, cardiorespiratory and muscular fitness, and even brain health. And then in addition to all of these benefits that youth can gain from physical activity, research also shows that there are additional benefits that youth can gain through sports participation. So these are some of the more psychosocial benefits like confidence and self-esteem, those interpersonal and relationship skills like teamwork and leadership, and then what we like to call life skills, so goal setting and time management. So with all of those great benefits, we really want all youth to be able to be physically active and play, but we know that not all youth have the same opportunities to participate in sports, which of course then results in unequal distribution of these benefits. So this figure here is based on data from the National Survey on Children's Health, and it highlights just a few examples of some of the disparities in youth sports participation. So specifically, this figure illustrates how girls, racial and ethnic minorities, and youth from lower income households are less likely to participate than their peers. And other data sources also show that youth living in rural areas and youth with disabilities have lower levels of physical activity and youth sports participation. So these disparities within the data highlight one of the main reasons that the Department of Health and Human Services developed the National Youth Sports Strategy, which was released back in September of 2019, so about a year ago. And the National Youth Sports Strategy is really a federal roadmap with actionable strategies that really aim to unify U.S. youth sports culture around a shared vision that one day all youth will have the opportunity, motivation, and access to play sports, regardless of their race, ethnicity, sex, ability, or zip code. So before we dive into the content of the strategy, I just wanted to share a bit more about how the document was developed so that you can see how the National Youth Sports Strategy fits into all the great work that is happening in the youth sports space. So in the development process, we recognize that the research on youth sports is different than what's been reviewed for other projects like the physical activity guidelines, for example. And that was a lot to be learned from practitioners in communities and sports organizations like yours that may not necessarily publish in traditional peer-reviewed journals. So we really wanted to be sure that, voices from the field, no sports pun intended, were included. So in addition to a scan of existing efforts across HHS, a literature review, and an environmental scan, we put out a call for public comments and hosted a public listening session where 16 different organizations shared insights on best practices for coach recruitment and training, programming, and strategies to engage underserved populations. So then taking all of that research and input into account, the National Youth Sports Strategy writing team developed a draft version, which was then released for public comments. So this period provided an opportunity to get feedback on an actual draft from members of the public, other federal agencies, non-federal organizations, members of the President's Council on Sports, Fitness, and Nutrition, and academic experts in youth sports. And so all these comments informed the final version of the National Youth Sports Strategy, which then, as with all federal products, went through formal departmental clearance to just ensure that there's agreement and consistency across HHS. And as I mentioned in discussing that we did a literature review and an environmental scan as part of our research, I wanted to highlight that during our research, we found that most of the best practices had been already compiled by large organizations. And these 4 documents from national conveners that summarize strategies for increasing youth sports participation really stood out. So I just wanted to highlight them here, as each of these were really key to the development of our overarching framework for understanding youth sports, which Allison will share more about.
Thanks, Mallory. So on the next slide, this slide, you'll see our framework, which we developed based on the social ecological model. So you can see the 5 different levels of influence and sectors in society. And we really wanted to make sure that we grounded everything in equity and inclusion. So each level of the framework has different factors that impact youth sports participation, and they describe factors at the individual level. So that's related to youth themselves. An important voice in anything we're doing when creating youth programs is to include the youth themselves. In the interpersonal level deals with adults who interact with youth in this sports sphere. So that's parents, coaches, that sort of thing, or that sort of person. And then we've got the organizational, community, and public policy levels. And in total, across all 5 levels, we've got over 50 opportunities and action items to help take this policy from the page out to the people, my favorite phrase, as Mallory would say, to make sure that it can be implemented in real life. And so these are all a different number at each level, but working together to make sure that sports are safe, fun, inclusive, developmentally appropriate, and accessible for all youth. So we're going to focus on the top 3 levels in this presentation, the community, organizational, and public policy levels. We imagine that most of the audience for this conference will find themselves at those levels. So the link for this is in the handout that we mentioned that we put in the chat, and you can find under our speaker profiles as well. But all of the information we're sharing today can be found at health.gov. And so let's dive in with the organizational level. So action steps for organizations. Organizations are really where the youth sports programming is happening. So you have a lot of opportunity there to ensure that you're working in alignment with the vision and providing safe, fun, inclusive, developmentally appropriate, accessible opportunities. So organizations can really set the tone for the culture of their programs and embrace a sports for all mentality so that you can offer programs that youth want to engage in and will continue to engage in. Organizations also, as they're developing this culture, can focus on physical literacy and sports sampling. And so those concepts really help youth learn how to use their bodies in different ways, different skills like running, jumping, throwing, that sort of thing. That's physical literacy, but also move their bodies in different ways in terms of different sports, so that they're exposed to a variety of activities and can find what really makes them excited and want to keep playing. And by incorporating and utilizing physical literacy and sports sampling concepts, This helps to reduce the risk of injury in the youth and also reduce the risk of burnout. Um, in addition to prioritizing physical literacy and sports sampling, many quality youth sports programs focus on both individual and team development. So that's through skill building, cooperation, learning, participation, and effort. So not just the performance outcomes, but more of the development outcomes. And many also incorporate principles of the American Development Model, which is out of the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee, and elements of positive youth development. Excuse me. So moving on to a few more opportunities. Organizations also play an important role in the health and safety of youth sports participants, and so are able to take action to create safer environments that minimize risks and maximize health benefits. So in terms of the health benefits related to physical activity, organizations can structure practices and games so that the participants are able to be more active and have more time in moderate to vigorous physical activity to meet the physical activity guidelines. So that can be smaller scrimmages or active rest time. So you're running off the field after your turn and you do some jumping jacks or something while you're waiting for your next turn. And for safety, organizations can establish and enforce appropriate safety practices and protocols. And so this is not only to reduce risk of injury, but also to ensure safety equipment is accessible, used correctly, and then also for safety in another realm, providing and requiring background checks for all coaches, officials, and volunteers to protect youth in that realm. Excuse me. On the next slide, we've got a couple additional strategies that organizations can use to create positive sports environments as it relates to coaches and volunteers. And so organizations can support the individuals who wish to become a coach, official, or volunteer through creative and active recruitment strategies, maybe using an online platform to recruit, register, train, and then schedule shifts, as well as provide incentives or access to additional training or certification opportunities so that the benefit isn't just for your organization gaining these individuals to run the programs, but also those individuals themselves gain skills and certification that can help them professionally as they continue in this field. And then we know from the research that we looked at, as well as what we've heard from our stakeholders, is that youth really benefit from coaches who share similar characteristics with them. So organizations can prioritize recruiting coaches who reflect the demographics of the community. So, excuse me, oh my gosh, right into the microphone. Girls benefit when they have coaches who are women, and all youth benefit when they have coaches who share the same race or ethnicity as they are. So before I lose my voice, I'll cover the last bullet here, which is about accessibility. So organizations can adapt or modify sports activities to meet the needs of youth of all abilities. So we're talking inclusive accessibility there. And also consider the location of sports programs and transportation options to ensure safe and inclusive access. So we're talking about actually physical access to the programs and sports opportunities. All right, I'm gonna get some water and let Mallory talk.
I was about to say there are so many action steps for the organizational level that it requires a glass of water to get through. So to help Allison out, I will start going into the community level where partnerships are a big focus, but I do want to provide kind of that disclaimer that partnerships don't have to be a broad community led effort. They can definitely stem from organizations, and partnerships between just 2 or 3 organizations can have immense value. And of course, within broader community coalitions, organizations will play a role. So you can consider this slide and the importance of partnerships as it relates to both the community and organizational levels. So communities can promote and encourage partnerships across different sectors. So that could be public health and sports, but it could also be business, education, healthcare, media, technology, community recreation, faith-based organizations, just really looking across the different levels of the framework, but also across different sectors of society. So then they can really utilize a variety of different partners to promote the benefits of youth sports and to provide and evaluate programs, to recruit coaches and volunteers, and to increase access to facilities. So, for example, some specific partnerships could be that partnerships with academic institutions and public health organizations with sports programs can help to evaluate those programs. And partnerships with national or local volunteer organizations such as AmeriCorps could help to recruit coaches, officials, and volunteers. And shared use agreements can be very helpful to increase access to facilities at schools or within the community. So continuing with that access piece, because that is really an important role for communities. Communities can work to ensure that play spaces are easily accessible for all youth. So that means locating programs in easy to get to spaces that are available by multiple modes of transportation, as well as then taking steps to make sure those spaces are accessible to youth with different abilities. And lastly, before I pass it back to Allison, communities can also continue to promote the benefits of sports and the importance of access to sports opportunities to youth and their families.
Great. All right. So I'm going to cover that top tier, broadest impact, I guess, maybe not broadest impact, but broadest sphere of influence on the public policy. And so we're talking about public agencies, mostly at government level. It could be parks and recreation, that sort of thing. But public agencies can support or identify an entity that has the responsibility for organizing and coordinating efforts related to sports within and across sectors to foster and expand youth sports participation. So at the federal level, we've got the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, and within our office, we have the President's Council on Sports, Fitness, and Nutrition. So we are, organizing and creating things like the National Youth Sports Strategy at the federal level. But at the local level, this could be an office within the health department or Parks and Recreation that has that role, or even an organization that hosts or offers youth sports opportunities through a public-private partnership. Um, Public agencies can collaborate on youth sports initiatives at the local, state, tribal, federal levels. And then also in terms of funding, public agencies can either provide or identify funding or other resources to support youth sports programs. And on the next slide, we've got a couple more opportunities for public agencies. So seeking out and supporting public and private sector partnerships, like the one I mentioned earlier, coordinating data collection by standardizing questions so that data can be compared across different programs and at different levels. And also supporting policies that facilitate access to youth sports and sports facilities. So shared use agreements, complete streets, ordinances, master development plans, safe routes to school, that sort of policy. And then public agencies have a large role in communicating and promoting the benefits of youth sports and can disseminate messages through a variety of platforms. We've got a couple of communication strategies that we'll share in a little bit. And so communicating and promoting the benefits of youth sports, the availability and of opportunities within your community or your location. So this is the role that the President's Council has at the federal level. And sort of wrapping up this content, in each of the levels, a common thread has been disseminating messages to promote the benefits of physical activity in sports and partnerships. So we're going to share a little bit more about how you can leverage resources from our office as it relates to those two themes. So first we're going to talk about communication. And so I mentioned the President's Council. And as part of our implementation of the National Youth Sports Strategy, we reinstated the Science Board Subcommittee of the President's Council on Sports, Fitness, and Nutrition. So you can see these delightful and very smart people listed here. So based on the research interests and recommendations from the council members, the Science Board developed a report that summarizes the youth sports experience, and that is from access, so getting into the program itself, context or optimizing the youth sports experience. So once they've got access, is it a positive or negative experience? The role of parents, coaches, and mentors in that experience, and then strategies for retention and keeping kids and teens active for the long haul. And they also developed a short fact sheet that highlights the benefits of youth sports. And these resources help to translate the science into more easily digestible format for policymakers, for the public. And so they're freely accessible for you all. And for you to help you spread the word, Mallory went ahead and put the link to these resources in the chat. So help you spread the word about the benefits of youth sports in your community and communicate about the importance of access to this type of opportunity. We also have resources that you can use to communicate with the public through our Move Your Way campaign, which Mallory is going to talk a little bit more about next.
Yeah, so continuing on kind of the communication theme, the Move Your Way campaign is the communication campaign for the physical activity guidelines. It has over 40 resources like fact sheets, posters, and videos that are all available in English and in Spanish, and they're free to download on health.gov. And so the campaign has specific evidence-based resources for different populations, including kids and parents, that aim to increase knowledge, boost self efficacy, and ultimately increase physical activity levels. There will be new youth sports specific resources for parents that will be coming out next year. So these resources will help parents to understand the benefits of youth sports. They'll encourage them to get their kids involved and provide some tips to overcome common barriers to their child's participation that came up in our research. So we're really excited about those materials. And if you join the health.gov listserv, you'll be notified when those materials are released. But even though the youth sports specific materials are not out yet, we encourage you to explore the many existing materials that are already there that you can use to promote physical activity in your community more broadly. Now, to move on to partnerships, we wanted to share an exciting opportunity to become a National Youth Sports Strategy Champion, or NYSS Champion, since it's a mouthful. We've recently launched this partnership initiative to provide an opportunity for youth sports stakeholders from across different levels of the framework to partner with our office and to join together in a network of organizations with the common interest of supporting youth sports and getting behind the vision of the National Youth Sports Strategy. So this next slide shows just a snapshot from the NYSS Champions page on health.gov. And so far we have 46 organizations of different sizes from different sectors that have joined. We also have organizations from all across the US. And all of these organizations are listed on our website, and you can find organizations near you that you might be interested in learning more about or partnering with by sorting based on state. And you can also find organizations based on the population served. So if you were looking for an organization that focuses specifically on girls or youth with a disability, you would be able to filter for that as well. So part of the goal of the initiative is to really just put a spotlight on the great work that is happening across the country. And we hope you will submit a statement of interest so that we could learn about your work and spotlight you. So To apply to become an NYSS champion, you can submit a statement of interest to sports@hhs.gov. And I know Allison might be putting some links in the chat, but just to reiterate that all of this is clearly laid out in the handout that we've referenced many times. So hopefully these links are easy for you to find. So approved organizations that become NYSS champions are recognized and spotlighted on our website and also receive the NYSS champions badge that you see here. So if you come across this badge on an organization's site, you'll know that they're doing work that's in alignment with the vision of the National Youth Sports Strategy. And we also send NYSS champions a toolkit of resources to help disseminate the National Youth Sports Strategy and promote physical activity. And we really look forward to growing our NYSS Champions network and exploring different ways for NYSS Champions to engage with us and each other. So I think we're going to throw into the chat a link to our blog post that describes the process and more information on how to apply.
Excellent. And I'll just wrap us up with a slide full of links, which we again put in that handout, which I know Tony tried to load up in the chat in feed loop, but like we said, it's in the Zoom chat, and also if you search Mallory Polster or Allison Vox-Bierke in the networking tab on the feed loop, you will be able to find that handout uploaded to our speaker profiles. But you know, we want to engage with you. You can find out more about the physical activity guidelines for Americans, the National Youth Sports Strategy, the Move Your Way campaign, all on health.gov. Easy to remember, health.gov. And you can stay up to date on the latest information from the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion by following @healthgov on Twitter and signing up for our listserv at ODPHP. So I think that is all we have. Thank you so much for joining us for this session today. And I think we can open it up. I know Tony said if you have any questions, put them in the chat. So happy to answer any questions or leave you with a fond farewell.